The dust-laden wind carried the sound of jeers and taunts as Hannah Hughes stumbled out of the general store, her cheeks burning with humiliation. The store owner had publicly refused her credit after discovering she'd lost everything in the recent drought that had ravaged western Kansas in 1887. With her farm dried up and her parents freshly buried in the hard, cracked earth, Hannah had nothing but the worn dress on her back and the stubborn pride that forced her chin upward despite the mocking eyes that followed her retreat. "Ain't worth the dirt under my boots," shouted one of the townsfolk, his voice carrying across the main street of Willow Creek. "Can't even pay for a sack of flour." Hannah's fingers trembled as she clutched her threadbare shawl closer. At 22, she had never imagined she would face such destitution. Just 6 months ago, her family's modest homestead had held promise, with wheat fields stretching toward the horizon and her parents' laughter filling their humble home. Now it was all gone, swept away by nature's cruelty and the unforgiving reality of frontier life. "Miss Hughes," a deep voice called from behind her. "Might I have a word?" Hannah turned, blinking away unshed tears to find Samuel Yates watching her with those intense blue eyes that had caught her attention the first day he rode into town 3 weeks prior. He sat astride his chestnut stallion, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the dusty street. The silver badge pinned to his leather vest gleamed in the harsh sunlight. The new deputy who had arrived just after the drought had taken its worst toll. "I have nothing to say to you, Deputy Yates," Hannah replied, her voice strained as she tried to maintain what little dignity she had left. Samuel dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the dirt. "I reckon you might change your mind when you hear what I have to offer." Her gaze snapped to his face. "I don't accept charity, sir." A hint of a smile touched the corners of his mouth beneath his neatly trimmed mustache. "Never said anything about charity, Miss Hughes. I'm talking about a job. Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house is in need of help since her daughter married that cattle driver last month." Hannah hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Why would you help me? You barely know me." Samuel adjusted his hat, pushing it back slightly to reveal more of his sun-bronzed face. "Because I recognize someone who's down on their luck, but ain't given up. And because Mrs. Peterson makes terrible coffee, and I reckon you might do better." For the first time in weeks, Hannah felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. "I do make exceptional coffee, Deputy." "Then we have an understanding," he said, offering his arm. "Let me walk you to the boarding house. Mrs. Peterson may be stern, but she's fair." As they walked down the dusty main street, Hannah felt the weight of stairs following them, but Samuel's tall presence beside her seemed to shield her from the worst of it. His kindness felt like a cool drink after months of thirst, but she couldn't help wondering what motivated this handsome deputy to reach out to the town's most destitute resident. Mrs. Peterson proved to be exactly as Samuel described, stern-faced with sharp eyes that assessed Hannah's worth in a single glance, but fair in her terms of employment. Room and board plus a small wage in exchange for cooking, cleaning, and helping with the laundry. By sunset, Hannah found herself in a tiny but clean attic room with an actual bed. The first time in weeks, she hadn't faced the prospect of sleeping in a barn or beneath the stars. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Hannah rose before dawn to start the coffee and prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly railroad workers, a traveling salesman, and of course, Deputy Samuel Yates. Samuel always greeted her with a tip of his hat and a "morning, Miss Hughes," before savoring her coffee with appreciation that bordered on reverence. "Best coffee west of the Mississippi," he declared one morning in early May, causing the railroad men to chuckle and Hannah's cheeks to warm. "You say that every morning, Deputy," she replied, refilling his cup. "Because it's true every morning," he answered, his blue eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to the wanted poster he was studying. Hannah had almost begun to feel a semblance of stability when Elijah Thornton and his son Victor rode into town. Thornton was a wealthy cattle baron who owned half the county and seemed intent on acquiring the rest. His arrival at the boarding house sent Mrs. Peterson into a flurry of activity, ordering Hannah to prepare the best room and cook the finest meal their humble supplies could provide. The man could buy this entire town if he took a notion, Mrs. Peterson whispered urgently as Hannah kneaded bread dough. "We need his business and his goodwill." That evening, As Hannah served dinner in the small dining room, she felt Thornton's cold gaze following her movements. He was a barrel-chested man with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes like flint, calculating and hard. "Girl," he called, his voice cutting through the polite dinner conversation. "You look familiar." Hannah stilled, the serving dish in her hands suddenly heavy. "I don't believe we've met, sir." "Hughes," he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "You're Thomas Hughes' daughter. The one whose family lost their claim after that pitiful excuse for a farm dried up." The room fell silent. Samuel's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his eyes darting between Hannah and Thornton. "My father was a good man who worked hard," Hannah replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the humiliation burning through her. Thornton laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Not hard enough, clearly. I told him to sell to me when he had the chance. Now look at you, a servant girl with nothing to your name." "Mr. Thornton," Samuel interjected, his voice carrying that quiet authority that seemed to command attention without raising volume. "I believe we were discussing the cattle drive routes, not Miss Hughes' personal affairs." Thornton's eyes narrowed at the interruption, but he nodded curtly. "Indeed we were, Deputy. Though I wonder why you concern yourself with the feelings of a penniless nobody." Hannah fled to the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the serving dish. She busied herself with the dishes, scrubbing each plate with unnecessary vigor as tears threatened to spill. She didn't hear Samuel enter until his boots scuffed against the wooden floor. "He had no right to speak to you that way," Samuel said, his voice low. "He said nothing that wasn't true," Hannah replied, keeping her back to him. "I am penniless. I am nobody. That's not how I see you." She turned then, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Samuel stood closer than she expected, his presence filling the small kitchen. "How do you see me then, Deputy Yates?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "I see a woman who didn't break when everything else did," he said simply. "I see someone who makes the best coffee I've ever tasted and who hums when she thinks no one's listening. I see Hannah Hughes." The way he said her name soft, yet certain, made something flutter in her chest. Before she could respond, Mrs. Peterson bustled into the kitchen, breaking the moment with demands for more coffee and apple pie for their important guest. Thornton and his son remained in town for 3 days, during which Hannah endured sidelong glances and thinly veiled insults. It seemed Thornton took personal offense at her continued existence after her father had refused to sell their land. On the final evening of their stay, as Hannah cleared the dinner dishes, Victor Thornton cornered her in the hallway. "My father says your family's land is going up for auction next month," he said, blocking her path. At 25, Victor had his father's build, but none of his restraint. "No one will bid against us. It'll be ours for pennies." Hannah tried to step around him. "Excuse me, I need to finish my work." Victor's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "You could make things easier on yourself, you know. A pretty thing like you shouldn't be scrubbing floors." Hannah's skin crawled at his touch. "Please release me. Is there a problem?" Samuel's voice cut through the dim hallway like a blade. Victor's grip loosened immediately. "Just having a friendly conversation with Miss Hughes here." "Didn't look friendly from where I'm standing," Samuel replied, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. Victor retreated with a forced laugh. "No need to get territorial, Deputy. Just making conversation." After he disappeared upstairs, Hannah released a shaky breath. "Thank you." Samuel's expression was grim. "Has he bothered you before?" "No, this was the first time," she assured him. "They leave tomorrow, so it doesn't matter." "It matters," Samuel insisted, his voice gentle but firm. "You matter, Hannah." The Thorntons departed the next morning, but their presence had disturbed the peaceful routine Hannah had established. The knowledge that her family's land, the only thing she had left of her parents, would soon be in Thornton's hands weighed heavily on her. 2 evenings later, Hannah was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the boarding house when Samuel approached, his usual confident stride replaced by an unusual hesitancy. "Evening, Miss Hughes," he greeted, removing his hat and fidgeting with its brim. "Fine weather we're having." Hannah couldn't help but smile at his awkward attempt at small talk. "Indeed it is, Deputy. Though I suspect you didn't come out here to discuss the weather." Samuel chuckled, the sound warming something inside her. "No, I suppose I didn't." He cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might accompany me to the town social this Saturday evening." The invitation caught her by surprise. The social, she repeated. I don't have anything appropriate to wear. You could wear that blue dress I've seen you in on Sundays, he suggested. I think it's mighty fine. Hannah blushed, touched that he had noticed. The townspeople already talk about me, deputy. Being seen with me will only invite gossip about you as well. Samuel stepped closer, his expression earnest. Let them talk. I'm not asking to court the town's opinion, Miss Hughes. I'm asking to court you. Her heart stuttered at his directness. Court me? But I have nothing. You have yourself, he interrupted gently. And that's more than enough for me. Those simple words spoken with such conviction melted a piece of the ice that had formed around her heart since her parents' passing. Then I would be honored to accompany you, Deputy Yates. His smile could have lit up the night sky. Samuel, he corrected. If we're to be courting, I'd prefer you call me Samuel. The town social was held in the newly constructed community hall, with paper lanterns strung across the ceiling and tables laden with home-cooked dishes contributed by the women of Willow Creek. Hannah had spent hours preparing for the evening, washing her blue calico dress and arranging her hair in a simple but becoming style. As Samuel escorted her through the doors, she felt the curious stares of the townsfolk, some friendly, others less so. Deputy Yates greeted Mayor Wilson, a portly man with an impressive mustache. His smile faltered slightly when he noticed Hannah. And Miss Hughes. What a surprise to see you here. Miss Hughes was kind enough to accept my invitation, Samuel replied smoothly. I'm the fortunate one this evening. The mayor's wife appeared at his side, her gaze sweeping over Hannah's modest dress. How charitable of you, deputy. Hannah felt her cheeks burning, but Samuel's hand tightened reassuringly on hers. Not charity, Mrs. Wilson. Pleasure. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe they're starting a reel, and I've been looking forward to dancing with my companion all week. He led Hannah to the dance floor before the couple could respond. As the fiddle struck up a lively tune, Samuel's hand settled at her waist, warm and steady. I don't remember the last time I danced, Hannah admitted as they joined the line of dancers. Then I'll have to make sure you don't forget this one, Samuel replied with a wink that sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. For a few blissful hours, Hannah forgot about her troubles. Samuel proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her through reels and waltzes with surprising grace for such a tall man. When they paused for refreshments, he brought her punch and stayed close, his attention never wavering despite the efforts of several young women to catch his eye. People are staring, Hannah murmured as they stood near the punch bowl. Let them, Samuel replied, his eyes on her alone. They're just jealous I'm with the prettiest girl in the room. Hannah laughed softly. You're quite the flatterer, Samuel Yates. Not flattery, if it's true, he countered with that disarming smile. The pleasant evening took a turn when Lillian Foster, the banker's daughter, approached with several of her friends trailing behind. Deputy Yates, Lillian greeted, pointedly ignoring Hannah. We've saved you a place at our table for supper. Samuel's arm slid around Hannah's waist. That's kind of you, Miss Foster, but Miss Hughes and I have already made arrangements. Lillian's smile tightened. Surely the deputy doesn't intend to spend the entire evening with. Well, her gaze flicked dismissively to Hannah, with someone who couldn't even hold on to her family's land. What could you possibly have to offer a man like Deputy Yates? Hannah felt the words like physical blows, but before she could respond, Samuel stepped slightly forward, his expression hardening. Miss Foster, he said, his voice low but carrying enough that those nearby could hear. Miss Hughes has shown more courage and dignity in adversity than most show in comfort. She has my respect and my admiration. I'll thank you not to speak of her in such a manner again. Lillian's face flushed with embarrassment. I was merely pointing out that she has nothing, she has me. Samuel interrupted firmly. And that's enough. A hush fell over their corner of the hall. Hannah stood frozen, caught between mortification at being the center of attention and a spreading warmth at Samuel's defense. Lillian retreated, tugging her friends along with murmured comments about lowering standards. I'm sorry about that, Samuel said once they were alone again. Hannah shook her head, emotion making it difficult to speak. No one has ever stood up for me like that. His expression softened as he tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Get used to it. I plan to do it as often as necessary. The ride back to the boarding house that night was quiet, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. When Samuel helped her down from the wagon, his hands at her waist lingered longer than strictly necessary. "I had a wonderful time," Hannah said, reluctant for the evening to end. "As did I." Samuel's voice was deeper than usual as he stepped closer. "Hannah, I meant what I said earlier. You have me. For as long as you want." In the silvery moonlight, Hannah found the courage to speak her heart. "And if I want forever?" Samuel's smile was slow and beautiful. "Then you have me forever." His lips found hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened, his arms drawing her closer as she melted against him. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Hannah felt as though her world had shifted on its axis. "Good night, Samuel," she whispered. "Sweet dreams, Hannah," he replied, waiting until she was safely inside before returning to his wagon. That night, for the first time since her parents' deaths, Hannah's dreams were indeed sweet. The following weeks brought a blossoming courtship that became the talk of Willow Creek. Samuel called on Hannah properly, taking her for rides in the countryside and bringing her wildflowers he collected on his patrols. They shared quiet conversations on the boarding house porch and stole kisses when Mrs. Peterson wasn't looking. With each passing day, Hannah felt more of her grief and uncertainty recede, replaced by a growing hope for the future. But shadows loomed on the horizon. The date for the auction of her family's land approached, and with it, the Thorntons returned to town. Samuel had been making discreet inquiries about the auction process, consulting with Judge Parker about legalities that he wouldn't fully explain to Hannah. "Just trust me," he would say when she pressed for details. "I'm working on something." 2 days before the auction, Hannah was returning from delivering fresh bread to the sheriff's office when she noticed a crowd gathered outside the land office. Pushing closer, she recognized the imposing figure of Elijah Thornton engaged in a heated discussion with Mayor Wilson and Judge Parker. Samuel stood to one side, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Absolutely unheard of," Thornton was saying, his face flushed with anger. "You can't simply change the terms of a public auction." Judge Parker remained unruffled. "Nothing's been changed, Mr. Thornton. The law clearly states that family members have first right of purchase at assessed value before public auction. Since Miss Hughes has declared her intent to exercise that right, there will be no auction." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. What was happening? "That girl doesn't have 2 pennies to rub together," Thornton protested. "How could she possibly pay the assessed value?" "That's not your concern," Samuel interjected smoothly. "The funds have been verified by the bank." Thornton's gaze snapped to Samuel, comprehension dawning. "So that's your game, deputy? Buying land for a woman you've barely known a few months?" "The funds are Miss Hughes' legitimate inheritance," Judge Parker interrupted. "Deputy Yates merely helped locate the paperwork showing that her maternal grandfather left her a sum in trust upon his death 5 years ago. The bank in Topeka has verified the account." Hannah pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle her gasp. Her grandfather? She barely remembered him, a gruff man who had visited rarely before his death. Her mother had never mentioned any inheritance. Samuel spotted her then, his expression softening as he excused himself from the group and made his way to her side. "You weren't supposed to find out this way," he said quietly. "I was going to tell you tonight." "What's happening?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it true? About my grandfather?" Samuel nodded, guiding her away from the curious onlookers. "Your mother's father left you a modest sum when he passed. The notification was sent to your family's address, but with the drought and everything that happened after, I suspect your parents never received it. When I wrote to the county clerk in Topeka asking about any unclaimed assets in your family's name, they found the record." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I wanted to be certain before giving you false hope," Samuel explained, his gaze earnest. "The bank needed to verify everything, and Judge Parker had to confirm your legal right to reclaim the land. So the farm, it's really mine again." The possibility seemed too wonderful to believe. "If you want it," Samuel confirmed with a gentle smile, "though it needs considerable work to be viable again." Hannah's mind raced with implications. Her land, her home, could be hers again. But the drought had taught her harsh lessons about the precariousness of farming alone. "I don't know if I can manage it by myself," she admitted, "even with funds for supplies and seeds." Samuel took her hands in his his touch steadying her racing thoughts. Hannah Hughes, I have something to ask you. And I had planned a far more romantic setting than the middle of the street. He glanced around with a self-deprecating smile before meeting her gaze again. But it seems the moment has found us instead. Her heart began to pound as he lowered himself to one knee before her, seemingly oblivious to the townsfolk who had begun to notice and gather at a respectful distance. Hannah, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what it means to face hardship with grace and to find joy in simple things. I don't want to help you manage that farm as your friend or even as your courting partner. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring with a modest pearl set in silver. I want to build a life there with you as your husband. Will you marry me? The world seemed to still around them as Hannah looked down at this man who had changed everything. You would give up being a deputy to become a farmer? Samuel's smile widened. I'd give up far more for the chance to wake up to your coffee every morning for the rest of my life. A laugh bubbled up through Hannah's tears. Is that your only reason for wanting to marry me? My coffee? Well, that and the fact that I love you more than I ever thought possible, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. What do you say, Hannah Hughes? Will you make me the happiest man in Kansas? Yes, she breathed, barely giving him time to slide the ring onto her finger before she threw her arms around his neck, heedless of propriety or the cheers that erupted from the onlookers. Samuel lifted her off her feet in a joyful embrace, spinning her once before setting her down and claiming her lips in a kiss that promised forever. They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church at the edge of town. Mrs. Peterson wept openly during the ceremony, having appointed herself Hannah's surrogate mother for the occasion. Even Sheriff Burke looked suspiciously misty-eyed as he stood as Samuel's best man. The Thorntons had left town the day after the land dispute was settled, but not before Elijah Thornton had approached Hannah outside the general store with a grudging offer. My cattle need water access on the creek that runs through your property, he had said stiffly. I'm prepared to pay for grazing rights. Hannah had glanced at Samuel, who nodded slightly. We can discuss terms after the wedding, Mr. Thornton, she replied evenly. I believe fair business arrangements benefit everyone. The older man had studied her with new respect before nodding curtly. Perhaps you're more your father's daughter than I gave you credit for. By midsummer, Hannah and Samuel had transformed the neglected Hughes homestead. The house had been repaired, fields planted with drought-resistant crops, and a small herd of cattle purchased with the remainder of Hannah's inheritance and the income from their grazing arrangement with Thornton. Samuel had indeed resigned his deputy position, though Sheriff Burke occasionally called on him for assistance with particularly difficult cases. On a warm August evening, they sat together on the porch swing Samuel had built as a wedding gift, watching the sunset paint the western sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. Any regrets? Hannah asked, nestled against his side. About leaving town life for this? Samuel's arm tightened around her shoulders. Not a single one. Though I do miss Mrs. Peterson's disapproving glares whenever I tried to steal a kiss from you. Hannah laughed, turning to face him. Well, there's no one to disapprove now. That's the best part of being married, he murmured, leaning down to capture her lips in a lingering kiss that held all the promise of their shared future. As twilight deepened around them, Hannah reflected on how much had changed in a single year. From destitution and despair to love and renewal, a journey she could never have imagined when she stood humiliated outside that general store. What are you thinking about? Samuel asked, brushing a kiss against her temple. About how I once had nothing, she replied softly. And now I have everything that matters. Samuel took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band that had joined the pearl engagement ring. You own my heart, Hannah Yates. And I'd say that's worth more than all the cattle in Kansas. It's enough, she agreed, resting her head on his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. More than enough for forever.